name is Louise Sandberg. I have been running many of our author events now for the last 30 years? No, not quite 30 years, 25 years. I want to introduce you to our latest local author, John Desmond, who's written a rather interesting book called The Black Thorn. Only one. And it's about Ireland, it's about America, and it's a very interesting read. Mr. Desmond is a resident of Andover, so we think he's local, okay? And I'm gathering Irish descent, too,
yes,
as well.
Very much so.
And he's going to just talk to us for a little bit about what he does and why he wrote the book, and if we have any questions, this is a chat. This is not anything formal. We've done this a number of times, and again, sometimes we have lots of people, sometimes we just have just a few. So I apologize, but it's your turn now.
Okay, thanks very much. Thank you all for coming. I appreciate the interest in my work. As Louise said, my name is John Desmond, and even though I'm living in Andover now, I was born and raised in the mill town right down the river here in Lowell, Massachusetts. And born there, raised there, went to parochial school before I attended the public schools. And I thought what I would do is give you a little bit about my background, because I think that explains the reason why I wrote the book, the impetus behind it all. And I was born into a pretty well-known family, but my great-grandfather, he immigrated here from Ireland in the 1800s, and his name was Cornelius Desmond. He came from County Cork, and at first he settled in different places in Massachusetts before he landed in Lowell, and he was a blacksmith. And I don't know if any of you are familiar with Lowell at all, but there's a little street there that connects, it's in downtown Lowell, it connects Merrimack Street, which is the main street, with Market Street, and it's the bar in the H, I guess you would call it. It was Palmer Street. He opened up a blacksmith shop there. Tough man. Came here, of course, when there was always that anti-Catholic, anti-Irish feeling. And you have to remember who built Lowell. There were the Cabots, the Shaddocks, the Lowells. They were big businessmen, Protestant families in Boston, who built Lowell as the first industrial city in the United States. And my family struggled, of course, just like all Irish Catholic families did. And my mother's family was from Tipperary, and right in the shadow of the Rock of Cashel. If anybody's been to Ireland at all, you know the Rock of Cashel. And they were from a little place in Lowell called the Acre. Now, I know they have an acre in Haverhill, but the acre in Lowell got its name literally because the people who ran the city of Lowell hated the Irish so much they gave them no place to live. And they wouldn't hire them in the mills. There were signs out front of the mills saying, "Irish and dogs need not apply." So that's what they felt about us. The only jobs we could get were the canal diggers. The Irish dug all the canals in Lowell to take up the excess floodwaters every single year. Most dangerous work. And they had no place to stay, so what happened was the English Protestants that ran the city of Lowell gave them literally 1 acre of land in Lowell. And it's from there that they built all the tenements, and the acre became an Irish slum. And my great-grandmother, who was 11 years old, lived in that slum, and my family, my mother, they all stayed in the acre. As it expanded in Lowell, became bigger than an acre, of course, but it was always the 3 tenement houses surrounded by the mills, and my mother grew up in the acre. So when I was just a little guy, my mother worked, and I don't know if anybody's familiar with this, but there was still a mill operating in Lowell in the 1950s called the Mohair Plush Mills. And she worked there in the fabrics department. I guess we didn't come very far. We were still in the mills even when my mother was younger. And so she would drop me off at her aunt's house in the acre. She lived in the top floor of a 3-tenement house. And I could watch all the people coming out of the mills, watch the rag man come down the street with his horse and buggy. In those days, different time, although it doesn't seem that long ago. And I would watch all these poor people get out of the mills. They were hard lives, tough people, but always smiling, always good-natured. And then my mother would pick me up, we'd drive to the other side of the city, and on their way, I would pass these large mansions on Andover Street, where everybody who owned the places lived. And even as a young kid, I noticed the differences between the two. And I had all kinds of questions as a kid. I was one of those guys, I had 4 brothers, I was the oldest, and I was one of these people who had all kinds of questions, wanted to know why things were so different from one group of people than they were for another group of people. Well, my father got sick of answering all these questions, and of course he said, come on, we'll go down to the library. So we went down to the Lowell City Library, great big gray granite building, beautiful place.
Beautiful place.
It is a remarkable building, and I fell in love with it. And every Saturday, I'd walk down there, grab some books, walk back, and I fell in love with books. I fell in love with reading, and I swore, I said, someday, and this was a little guy, I was just little, someday I'm going to have a book in this building. I'm going to write one too, and it's going to be in this building. So there was the impetus behind it, and the question was now, what do I write about? As I got older, I wanted the book to have meaning. I just didn't want it to be, I wanted it to be entertaining. I wanted to tell a good story, but I also wanted it to have a lesson. And my Irish background, as I grew older, I went to school, I majored in history. We didn't have any money. I had to go to the local school. I still call it Lowell State College. I won't call it University of Massachusetts. But that's where I went to school. I got my master's degree at Fitchburg State, and I took some graduate courses. Luckily, I got accepted into a couple of programs at Harvard University. And I said, I want to write something that tells a story, but also has a lesson. And as I grew older, I noticed that since I studied history and taught history, I was a teacher for 34 years at Billerica Memorial High School. I said, this particular country claims to be this, but in reality, it's that. It's not as equal as it claims to be, and it doesn't value the equality the way it claims to value the equality. So I said, if I'm going to write a story, it's going to be something that involves this inconsistency. So then I fell onto my Irish heritage, and I said, well, I'm going to write a story about the Irish people and when they came to America and how they started to fight the poverty that existed and the oppression that existed. And they've come a long way, of course, since those days. So my book actually centers on the systems that are in place that actually keep people down. Now, back in the 1800s, the people they kept down were the Irish Catholics. They hated Irish Catholics more than they hated anybody. And hi, welcome, come on in. And so my story starts in 1846, just as the potato blight was starting. And I'm going to use that word on purpose. I'm using the word blight instead of famine. I hope you notice that. Because I want to tell you something, there was never, ever a famine in Ireland. There never was. Now, a famine is when an area has absolutely no food whatsoever. Nothing can grow. Natural causes make it impossible to grow any kind of crops. Livestock begins to die, and as a result, the people begin to starve. But during this time period that people call the famine, which went from 1846 to the 1850s on and off, it kept coming back and back and back, there was plenty of food in Ireland. 2.5 million Irish men, women, and children died of starvation in the shadow of warehouses that were bulging with food.
I know.
Bulging with food.
Yeah.
And the people in charge, the English, because they ran the entire country at that particular time period, came up with a system in which, well, we're going to give them a relief system here, and in order to do that, we're going to raise the taxes on the landlords. Well, then the landlords raised the taxes on the Irish people. So it really did nothing. They couldn't afford to buy food. Their crop, the only crop that they were allowed to eat in order to hang on to their land, was the potato, and that was failing. So the Irish made up the story that it was a famine. And it's something that has stuck to this very day. The Irish themselves call it a famine. And one of the things I want to do in my book is just to show that that is an English lie that was put into place to cover an attempted, in my opinion, an attempted genocide on the Irish people. Because at this particular time period, in the 1800s, the Napoleonic Wars were all over. And during the Napoleonic Wars, of course, Europe could not dedicate its land to growing crops. They were fighting wars. So Ireland was the major source of food for Europe during the Napoleonic Wars. Well, when those wars died, or were over, European countries went back to planting. They didn't have to import food any longer. But what they needed from Ireland was meat. And so the Irish landlords knew that they had to have grazing instead of crop raising. But there were too many people in Ireland taking up the land to have grazing. So they had to get rid of these people somehow. The potato blight was a very convenient thing for the Irish landlords. 2.5 million people died, and then they began to foreclose on all of the land that the Irish had. So another 2.5 million people left Ireland. They went to Australia, they went to Canada, they went to the United States.
Northern London.
Yes,
Liverpool.
yes, they did. They went to Liverpool as well. There's a high percentage of Irish that still
To interrupt you,
still
but
live
you
there.
know,
No, that's okay.
All the Beatles came from, they were all Irish.
Yes, that's right. McCartney,
Well,
Lennon.
but all of them.
Yeah, yeah. So there, I
never
think
thought about
I think it was a genocide myself. And so Ireland's population went from about 8 million souls down to about 4 million. So Ireland was in very, very rough shape. And when the people crossed over the Atlantic Ocean, and by the way, the landlords would pay their way to get there because they wanted to get rid of them so badly, but they put them on board these vessels that looked like they, even as they were sitting in the harbor, looked like they were about to sink. They were called coffin ships. You've probably heard them. That's what the Irish get. And basically because 2 out of every 10 people who got on board those coffin ships never made it across the Atlantic Ocean. 20% of the people died on those coffin ships, and they would simply dump the bodies into the ocean.
This would still have been under sail?
Yes,
Okay,
it
so
would
that-
be. The coffin ships were under sail, yes. Now, when they did get here, of course, what they found was that the people who had founded this country were English Protestants. And so when they got here, they found a government system, a banking system, a religious system that was the same thing that they had left in Europe. And so they ran into the same bigotry. They ran into the same prejudice. They ran into the same cruelty that they were facing back in Ireland. And as a result, the Irish, when they got here, instead of having streets paved with gold, they had faced the very same system that was oppressing them back in Ireland. So, my story is meant to illustrate, in view of what people are going through today with the immigration issues in the United States, and when I see that young kids are being ripped out of people's arms and put in cages, families are being separated, bigotry against the Hispanics, don't think it's just because they have darker skin. Remember, they're Catholics. And so there is still, in the United States today, under the people who really rule it, there is still this animosity toward Catholicism. You don't see it too much here in Massachusetts because we have such a high population of Catholics. But go to the Bible Belt. Go to the South. And you will see that there is still this animosity, this distrust of Catholicism. So the Irish had a hard time. So my book kind of illustrates this. And it starts out, my main character is a character by the name of Joseph McDonough. By the way, has everybody here read the book? No?
No.
Okay.
I volunteer at the Supplements Library, the Irish Foundation.
Oh, yeah.
And I was asking her if it was a new one or an old one.
Yeah, it's relatively new.
I'm going
It's
to look for it on the shelf.
yeah.
There should be a copy at AOH now. When it was put in, forgive me, it was put in just at the branch and someone stole it.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
That's hard.
Oh, wow. I'm honored.
That happens a lot.
Yeah. Well,
Anyway, I put one in
Oh, they
IOH.
just forgot to return.
It should be over there.
yeah, maybe. I dedicated a couple of books to the AOH, and Billy Sullivan told me he gave one to the library, one for the collection and one for the circulation. So they had a couple anyway. But if you really want one, they're on sale at Amazon.com. Just go on and type in my name, the title of the book, The Black Thorn. It'll pop right up there, and it's very easy to purchase. In fact, I even bought a few copies today in case anyone's interested. So, anyway, the main character starts off in the book in 1846 in Ireland. His name is Joseph McDonough. And he's 10 years old at the time. And he sees all the poverty, he sees all the oppression. And he watches as his aunt gets evicted and killed during the process. Well, his father is so outraged, of course, that he decides that he's going to resist the English rulers, the English landlords that are there. And the father, his name is Eamon McDonough. He starts one of the many, as you know, Ireland was famous for its secret societies. Some of the real secret societies included the Carters, they included the People Day Boys, the Lady Clares. I don't know if you've ever heard of these, but they were basically vigilante groups that would rise up and try to fight the English rule. So my character, Eamon McDonough, begins his own secret society, and he names it after the tough wood that the Irish used to use as weapons. They used them for shillelaghs, they used them for kippines, clubs, cudgels for battle. And that shrub, of course, is called the Black Thorn bush. So he named his secret society, and he cut it into two words this time to make a distinction between the plant and the name of the society. It's called the Black Thorn. And the Black Thorn begins to wreak havoc in Ireland, and it gets famous for what it's doing. Some people would say infamous. And they hunt down Eamon McDonough and his Black Thorn Society. Now, the reason I asked if anybody read it, because I don't want to spoil anything for anybody if they want to read it, so I will just leave it at that and let you know that eventually Joseph McDonough, who watches his father do all of this, is forced to leave as a young man when he's about 20 years old, and he goes to America. He lands in Philadelphia, runs into all the same prejudices and bigotry that exist, and the only job that he can find, oh, by the way, when he arrives in Philadelphia, the people that help him, and they figure prominently in my story, is the Ancient Order of Hibernians. The AOH always met people coming over on the boats, tried to help them out, tried to get them someplace to live, a job, something to eat, get them established in the new land, because everybody was out to get the Irish. So the AOH comes to his assistance, And the only job that he can get, the only job that any of them could get at that time, was the coal mines, digging in the coal mines. So my story takes Joseph McDonough, who, by the way, by this time he's so set on getting away from the system, getting away from all the bigotry. He says, I can't fight it, no one can fight it. What I'm going to do is, this is a big country, I'm going to get a plot of land, I'm going to live by myself, I'm going to farm, and I'm just going to mind my own business and try to be happily ever after in my new country. Well, he quickly finds out that that's going to be a lot more difficult than he thought it would be. Even though there's a lot of land available in the United States, he can't get enough money to buy any. So his plan is to work in the coal mines, save up some money, and then leave and start his own farm. But he finds out that things exist, such as the company store, where the people keep the miners in constant debt so that they can't shop anyplace else, they can't buy anything anyplace else. They must work in the company's, they must buy things from the company store in their own little coal patch, as it's called. And so they never pay them enough, so in order to do their job, they keep borrowing money, they keep going on credit, they can't get ahead. And Joseph gets extremely frustrated after a year or two of this. And then something happens in the United States that changes everything, and we're all familiar with it. It's called the United States Civil War. Well, oddly enough, the Civil War provides an opportunity for Joseph McDonough. Because as many of you might know already from your studies of the Civil War, it was what they call a rich man's war, but a poor man's fight. And what that meant was that the rich were making money off this war. The railroads, the coals, owners of the mills that were making uniforms, guns. Well, these rich people, there was a law called the substitute law. They, the rich, could buy their son's way, or their own way if they wanted to, out of the fighting. For $300, you could hire a substitute to go and fight the war for you. The rich kept their kids home, while the poor tried to take advantage of this, because $300 at that time period was a year's salary. So Joseph McDonough says, this is my ticket out. I'm going to be a substitute. I'm going to take my $300, put it away, and if I survive this nightmare, then I'll come back and I'll have enough money to start my farm. So he enters the Civil War. And he enters the second half of the Civil War, where they had the most nightmarish of fights. The Wilderness Campaign, where Grant just sends wave after wave after wave of human beings to get mowed down. And he tries to circle Richmond. And Robert E. Lee keeps fighting him and pushing him away, keeping him from capturing the southern capital. And Joseph McDonough is part of this whole campaign until they get down to the south of Richmond, in a place called Petersburg. And here the Confederates dig in. They're not going to let anybody through, because if they get through here, Richmond will fall, the war will be over. So one day, Joseph, by the way, was made a member of the Pennsylvania 48th. They were all coal miners. And one day they're sitting around the campfire after months of trying to break through the Confederate lines. And one of the officers overhears a conversation. And one of the miners says, you know, we could dig a tunnel right under the Confederate lines, come up behind them and slaughter them, then head over to Richmond and take the city. Everybody laughed at him, but this officer said, you know what, we can do this. So he went to Grant and he got permission, even though Grant didn't believe in the plan. He says, at least it'll keep them busy. So they began to dig this tunnel right underneath. And what they did was they dug it in the shape of a T. And when it was all done, they packed the tunnel with dynamite. Huge amount of dynamite. This is a true story, by the way. This is a true battle. This happened. And then they said, we will blow this place up, come up right through the tunnel, come up in back of these guys, and we'll end this war in no time. Well, they lit the fuse. After digging the tunnel, they dug it in the shape of a T, and the top of the T was loaded with dynamite. They lit the fuse, nothing happened. So they sent in soldiers, and they said, somewhere along the line the fuse broke, you got to repair it. So they did. Then they lit it a second time. And what happened then was, up until that time in history, the largest explosion, man-made explosion in the history of the world took place. And this whole thing just erupted. And what was left in its place was a massive, massive crater. The Union troops poured through the tunnel into the crater, came up. And at first they had an advantage, but then Lee sent reinforcements. And they drove all these people back into the crater. And the nightmare began. I'll let you read what happened with the battle itself rather than tell you. Anyway, Joseph survives, but one of his very, very close friends does not. He dies in the hospital after the battle. And it is at this point that Joseph has an epiphany. And he realizes, I am never going to reach my dream. They just won't let me. Even if I get money, even if I survive the rest of this war, they will never let me do this. So he decides that when he goes back to Pennsylvania and back to the coal fields, what he's going to do is unionize the coal fields. And the tradition of unions comes from the secret societies back in Ireland. The Irish had a tradition of getting together, forming numbers to resist oppression. And that's where the idea of these unions come from. They're actually, if you want to call ideas a descendant, they're descendants of the secret societies of Ireland. Joseph goes back, he organizes a union, and they begin to resist the coal miners, the coal mine owners, and the railroad owners in Pennsylvania. And of course, the powers that be are not going to let Joseph McDonough get away with this. And so what they do is, there's fighting back and forth. Death takes place. And Joseph McDonough is arrested for the murder of a brutal mine boss, and he goes on trial. Now, during this time, they tried to get people against this idea of forming unions. They say how un-American it is. They call them socialists, because that's when the word started first coming out, socialism. That's when Karl Marx initiated the term. So they say all these things about these people who are just trying to make a living for themselves. That's all they're trying to do. Get a decent wage, decent working conditions. And so they try to form the union. Well, of course, they have to stop Joseph McDonough. So they arrest him for the murder of a mine boss. Now, I'm not going to tell you whether he did it or not. And I'm not going to tell you the outcome of the trial, but there is a trial, and I put the trial in the book itself and the verdict. And I'm going to not spoil it for you. I don't want to give a spoiler alert and tell you the ending of the book, but the ending of the book comes up as a result of this. And the entire book is really an attempt to show you that the prejudices, the systems that exist in the United States back in the 1800s, I believe, still exist today. I don't know that we've come this far so that we can be true to our creed. And let me tell you what I mean by that when I say that. I want to remind you of what the United States is supposed to be. Back when this country was started, and we were going to revolt against British rule, and the founding fathers got together and they were going to write a new constitution. Well, a group of them got together, Ben Franklin, John Adams, Thomas Jefferson, they got together and they said, look, if we're going to do this, if we're going to cause this violence, if we're going to break away, we owe it to the world to let them know why we're doing what we're doing. Because if we don't, they'll just think we're a bunch of rabble-rousers here. So let's write a reason for this. Let's write a reason why we are declaring our independence. That's what the Declaration of Independence is. It's a message to the world. This is why we're doing what we're doing. Now, I want you to remember the preamble to the Declaration of Independence, not the Constitution, the Declaration of Independence. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal. They are endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights, among which are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. That defines, that is the definition for the reason of the existence of this nation. Let me just let this sink into you for a minute. The United States of America is the only country in the history of the world that started on the basis of the value of a human life. Every other country started differently. There was a small tribe of people separated from other groups of people by a mountain range or a river system or an ocean. And this small tribe grew up and they developed similar languages, similar customs, similar beliefs. And they became Italians, French, Germans, Russians. But that's not how the United States started. We are a true melting pot. We can't say that we all come from a similar culture. But what we can say is we have a certain belief. And when I was a teacher, teaching United States history, I would start every year and I would ask my students, what makes an American? Do you have to be born here? What if you're born here and you're an evil person? What if Adolf Hitler was born in the United States? Would he be an American? What if Joseph Stalin was born here? Would he be an American? And someone didn't want to say yes to that, of course, because I don't want to have Adolf Hitler or Joseph Stalin identified with being an American. So I said, I maintain that it's not where you're born, it's what you believe. And I said, if you read the Declaration of Independence and that preamble, and you believe in that, you believe that all human beings are created equal, and they deserve to have their natural rights honored, I said, that's an American. And you have to believe that. If you don't believe that, and you're born here, well, you're a citizen of the United States, of course, but that's political. You're not really an American. Well, they resisted this, of course. They want to hold on to their own prejudices. They want to hold on to their own bigotries a little bit. And so they wrestled with this concept. And I said, no, this is the basis upon which we started. This is the reason we started the revolution. If you don't believe in this, you're not an American. So I said, that means that there are people who could be born in a different country, become familiar with the Declaration of Independence, believe it, and honor it. And I said, they could come from anywhere. They can come from Mexico. They can come from South America. They can come from Europe. They can come from China. And if they believe this, they're more American than the person who doesn't believe it. Well, this threw them for a loop, of course, my students. And they never thought of things in that vein before. And so I just let them wrestle with it for the rest of the year. We would give examples of people who were either not consistent with being an American or were very consistent with being an American. And we studied history in this way. Today, I have slowly watched, and it wasn't just because of Donald Trump. We started this a long time ago, where people started to say, we can't let any of these immigrants in anymore. They're poisoning our systems. Now, I agree that Donald Trump raised this to the point where it's a national disgrace doing what they're doing to immigrants, in my opinion. I don't know how everybody feels about that, but I'm just throwing that out there, and you're more than welcome to disagree with it. But it's so inconsistent with who we are as a people. This is a nation of immigrants. Immigrants built this particular country. And to say now that we have no room for them, well, I think people have short memories. I'm only a few generations removed from immigration. I don't know how far away this group is from your immigrant relatives. But unless you're all pure-blooded American Indians, then you're part of an immigration wave at some point in our history. So the Black Thorn, my book, is an attempt to make people think about how people are treated. And I wanted them to kind of take what was written in my story and apply it to what is happening today. Much the same way that Arthur Miller did. You might remember his book, The Crucible. He wrote that in the 50s. And even though it's about the Salem witchcraft trials, he wrote it because he wanted to expose Joseph McCarthy for his witch hunts with communism. But he was afraid that he would be blackballed. So rather than go directly against McCarthy, he showed, or tried to show, Americans what witch hunts are in reality. And he hoped that the story of the Salem witchcraft trials would let them, make them aware of what was happening in the 1950s. Well, I'm hoping that the same thing happens with my book, The Black Thorn. I'm hoping people look at how they treated the Irish when they first came over here and make that transfer to the modern day. How are we treating human beings today who are fleeing injustice, who are fleeing not just injustice, but fleeing for their lives? And what are we doing? Well, our president has labeled them all. And if you listen to what President Trump said about people trying to come into the country today, it is and this was spooky, it is the exact same language that they used against the Irish. They're all criminals. They're all rapists. You can't trust them. They're filthy. It's the same exact language. And I'm saying to myself, we've learned nothing. We're not doing a good job teaching our history. And now what we have are kids in cages, separated from their mothers and fathers. We're building walls. And in my mind, we're going about the immigration process all wrong, and we're going back to the Gilded Age. You can see our President of the United States trying to destroy unions. You can see him, by the way, he is trying to get rid of things like Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, calling it socialism. Well, do you like Medicare? Because I'll admit to you right now freely, I'll freely admit to you, it's a socialistic program.
I don't have it.
It works.
And it works. Do you like Medicare? That's a socialistic program. Do you like public schools? Do you think only the wealthy should be educated?
Nope.
Well, that's a socialistic program. Anytime you take public funds and start programs for people, that's a socialistic program. Now, without those programs, let's go back to the Gilded Age, the late 1800s. You had no unions. You had no programs. You didn't have people taking care of the elderly. You didn't have people taking care of the poor. You had child labor. You work 6 days. You work 6 days a week, 12 hours a day. All we did as people was make the rich richer. And I don't know if that's what our president means when he says, let's make America great again. But if you ask me, it wasn't that great. It didn't start to become a great country until we started taking care of people that had a hard time taking care of themselves. Should we not give help to the elderly? Should we not help kids? Should we not help orphans? Should we not try to get public education? I like capitalism. I like owning my own property. It's my defense against people who would make me homeless, really. But unfettered capitalism? Well, you saw that in the late 1800s. Capitalism has to be tempered with socialistic programs like we have in the second half of the 20th century. Without that, we would all be right back into the 1800s, right back there. And so my book, The Black Thorn, is meant to show people what life would be like in the United States if we didn't have those programs, so that we can educate them. Now, I realize full well that my book isn't on the New York Times bestseller. There aren't millions and millions of people buying the book. So it was my modest attempt to try to educate people. I guess the teacher in me never left. And I'm trying to make my classroom as big as possible. I want to spread it out with my writing. And I want people to see that all those systems that existed back in the 1800s are still there. Our government, by the way, and our country, make no mistake, and I'm not saying this in an insulting way, this is a Protestant country. It's based on Calvinistic principles. Our constitutions, even the federal constitution, is based on the Massachusetts Constitution, which is the oldest constitution in the world, by the way. And it was written by Calvinistic Puritans to protect themselves. Now, all the other states, as they developed, used the Massachusetts Constitution as their model. And when the federal government was formed, later on, hundreds of years later, by the way, they used the Massachusetts as a model. That's why when you go to Massachusetts government, you see a House of Representatives, a Senate, an executive, a judicial branch. Well, compare that to the United States. House of Representatives, Senate, executive. They used it as a model. And all the principles behind it, capitalism, was meant to foster wealth. Now, they had no intention of allowing anybody else into this system. Just read the story of Anne Hutchinson and you'll find out that that was true. However, what they didn't count on was the Bill of Rights, the Declaration of Independence, the Constitution of the United States that you could now sue in court. So gradually, very, very, very gradually, the United States became more and more and more inclusive. And more people got a piece of the pie. And can you tell us when we actually had a better time period than the 1950s, take out the Vietnam War, of course, 1960s. In that period of time, right after the New Deal came in, and people all of a sudden, and then of course you had Lyndon Johnson's Great Society, where you had GI Bill. Look at everything we did for the average person that raised their quality of life.
Amen.
It was beautiful. And now, after Reagan, they're slowly dismantling everything. And so my book is an attempt to warn people about this, to let them know that as quickly as we came up, we can just as quickly go down. So I had to self-publish my book because I couldn't get an agent. And in order for the big publishing companies to pick up a book, I found out the hard way that publishing companies don't talk directly to authors. They say, you have to get an agent, we'll talk to your agent. So I would get it. I spent the first year, I said to myself, well, I'm going to give myself a year to get an agent. The book was done. And every agent said the same thing. Send me 5 pages. And I would write back and say, you cannot get a flavor for this book in 5 pages. Please give it a chance. I couldn't get anybody to bite. So after a year, I said, well, I'm not going to wait any longer. I'll publish this myself. And so I went to Amazon. They had a great program, and I published the Black Thorn. And it's, in one way, it's much better because I have total control of the book. If I went to a publishing house, they would turn around and say, "We like your book, but you're going to have to take this out, this out, this out. You're going to have to change this, change that." And being Irish and thick, I hate being told what to do. So in one way, it was good because I had total control of what went into that volume. I even designed the cover myself. So the down part is I can't market anything. I'm the worst salesman in this world. I couldn't sell anything. I couldn't sell fire to an Eskimo. So marketing this book is very difficult and getting it out to people. So I do a lot of these talks. In fact, I've had these talks just about every month, and I have them up until May of this year, trying to make sure that people understand that it's out there. Now, I don't expect to get rich at this. What I do want to do is educate. I want people to be enlightened, and that's the real purpose behind the book, which is why I was so ready to just tell the publishers, I'll do this myself. But the frustrating part is getting people to know that it's there, getting it out there. I don't have the big publishing companies and their expenditures for advertisements. So I do an awful lot of these talks. I ask people to go to Amazon.com, click on my box, type in the name of the book, The Black Thorn, type in my name. My page will come right up. It's easy to buy. And they have the Kindle form if you prefer Kindle, and they have the physical form, which is the paperback. So that's what I'm doing. And I'm purposely not telling everybody how the book ends, so that hopefully your curiosity will reach the point where you would like to buy a copy. You can either go through Amazon, or like I said, I have a few copies here. I brought them up with me today. So I'm rattling on here. Does anybody have any questions for me? Any comments of your own that you might have? Some experiences of your own. Is everybody here Irish, by the way, of Irish background? Everybody? That's good. Good.
What city and county Cork did your parents come from?
My father came from Cork City itself, but a couple of years ago I was in Ireland, and I was in Kinsale, which is in the southern part of Cork County.
Mill Street.
Yeah. And we stayed at a bed and breakfast that was run by a wonderful, wonderful couple. They were older, and he was a retired policeman, the Garda. And he said, Desmond. He said, "I've run into a few of you boys." And I said, "I'm from America, I'm not from Cork." You can't blame me. So there are quite a few Desmonds that are still there.
Some Desmond cousins in Haven.
Oh, really? Yeah. There's a lot of them. My mother's family were Delahanties, and they were from Tipperary. My paternal grandmother, she was a Lynch, and she was from Bantry Bay. So
I have Lynches in my family.
Do you?
Yes.
Yeah. We're pure Irish, and so as a result, growing up, I heard all kinds of Irish songs, Irish stories, and became fascinated with the struggles of the poor Irish people. So, do you have any questions about anything?
No, I just want to let you know, going back, when you were talking about the old times, my great-grandfather, John Breen.
Mm-hmm.
First Irish Catholic
First
mayor
Irish
in the
Catholic
country.
mayor was
Right here.
in New England.
Yeah.
And, 2 years ago, when we did the thing over at
Yeah.
the Heritage, found out he was a Finian.
He was a Finian, was he?
Yes. And
Good
it
for
was
him.
his son during the 1912 strike.
Yep.
Someone put the
I know.
dynamite in the paper and it had his name on it. Everybody said, "Oh, he went to jail." He never went to jail.
No, he didn't.
Oh,
But he did wrap up the dynamite in a funeral magazine.
Is he related to the Breens that run the funeral?
yeah.
Oh,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah? Same family?
Yeah.
Same family? Okay.
I've been in touch with them. They had a big celebration because
Yes.
they came to their 150th.
Yeah.
They've been there since
50 years ago.
1860.
Yeah, yeah.
It
Yeah.
was my grandmother, after my grandfather died. She had to put the kids in boarding school just to take over the business. So I give her credit today. Because
Sure.
tomorrow is International Women's Day.
You know, you think about, and I ask people, I mean, we're sitting here now in the comfort of this nice building, and we have good lives. Can you imagine the price that our ancestors had to pay?
Oh, yeah.
Can you imagine
I think
it?
about it.
I think about it a lot,
lot.
and I'm so grateful to the things that they had to do. They shouldn't have had to do them, of course, but they did, and they tightened their belts and they did whatever they had to do
Yeah.
for their kids, for their grandkids. And you just have to sit back and marvel at their courage. I do anyway.
I have, since you grew up in Lowell, I just would like, I haven't ever asked anything this, but the Irish came to the ascendancy in Lawrence in the 70s, 1870s or so. When they first were here,
Mm.
Shanty Pond, you know that story, right?
Yep.
And they'd have to walk to Lowell to go to church for a long time.
Right.
Until Immaculate Conception came into being. Did Lowell have the same ascendancy of the Irish at more or less the same time?
Well, Lowell is about 10 years older than Lawrence.
20 years.
Yeah. Well, as a town, yes. So
Yeah,
um,
1824.
they made it very, very difficult for the Irish.
Of course.
And so it took them about the same amount of time. But as far as the politics is concerned, the Irish immediately went into politics. They had to. It was the only
And became
way.
cops, became firemen, and da-da-da-da-da. Yes.
City councilor.
Yes,
and,
yes.
And just to let you
Oh,
know, my father's family went through that process.
Yes.
My, as I told you, my great-grandfather, Cornelius Desmond, was a blacksmith, but he had a very large family. Cornelius Desmond Jr. became a state representative and served in the Massachusetts House of Representatives. In fact, he became so honored and respected that they approached him and they said, "We would like you to be the Speaker of the House," when there was a vacancy. And my uncle said, my granduncle, he said, no, I don't want that job. It's not my place to tell people what to do, how to vote, to organize them. I don't want that job. Well, they kept at him, and he kept on saying no. And they finally said, all right, we'll go give it to somebody else. They gave the job instead to Tip O'Neill.
Mhm.
And they went back, and my granduncle said, if I knew you were going to give it to him, I'd have taken the job.
Cambridge.
So,
He was from Cambridge.
He was from Cambridge. And so, as a result, when he passed on, my father ran for state representative, and he served in the Massachusetts House of Representatives until 1972. And in 1972, that's when Brad Morse, I don't know how many people remember Brad Morse, the congressman, Brad Morse resigned his seat in Congress, the United States House of Representatives, and they were going to have a special election. It wasn't going to be this long, dragged-out campaign. It was going to be 2 or 3 months. And my father said, I'm going to take a chance. I'm going to run. Well, as soon as it opened up, they changed. As soon as they found out that he was going to be a candidate, they changed the rule, and they said, no, it's going to be a regular election. Well, he didn't have the money to compete. He didn't take money. He didn't take money from PACs and things like that. So who came in? He had to run against guys like John Kerry, who was a carpetbagger. He kind of moved in here from Boston and set up shop there. So we have a rich political history in my family. So I grew up around a dinner table talking about issues that were being discussed in the Massachusetts legislature. So I became very well versed in the plight of people. So the Irish, even though they had their problems, they used the machinery that was here to ascend, to raise up. And of course they started Catholic schools because they weren't allowed into other schools. And I myself went to a school, and you mentioned the Immaculate Conception here in Lawrence.
Yes.
I went to the Immaculate Conception up until the 8th grade in Lowell. And my mother went to the first Irish Catholic church built in the Acre by the Irishmen, by the way, St. Patrick's Cemetery. St. Patrick's. And just to let you know, you talk about how hard it was, how they had to walk to Lowell to go to church. When we first came over in Lowell, they wouldn't let Irish people bury their dead in the same cemeteries as the Protestants. And they had a great big cemetery. Edson Cemetery was over in Gorham Street in Lowell. And they wouldn't let the Irish bury. We had to send our dead to Charlestown.
Wow.
There are lots of people in Charlestown, buried in Charlestown graves, that are from Lowell, because, and they actually had people who their job was carry the bodies, put them on a wagon, take them down to Charlestown for funerals. That's how much they hated the Irish. They didn't even want to be buried next to them. Now, it wasn't until we got our separate plot, St. Patrick's Cemetery, which, by the way, is right next to the Protestant cemetery. So that's how hard it was coming up.
I have an Irish question to ask you. I do a lot of genealogy and stuff, and one of the things that's come to my is that really a lot of South America, Mexico, so on, they often don't have the tendency to have really good records of birth, vital medical records, as well as not being prone towards reading and writing.
Mm-hmm.
And I've often thought a lot of that was Catholicism. But the Irish are the exception. They were always readers and writers. So,
Yes.
so for some reason, that one didn't hook in. And they were always
Right.
trying to educate children in the hedgerows. Am I right?
Yep.
And it
Shanachis.
wasn't like that in other Catholic countries at the time. I'm not sure. I think there's something specific about their
The Irish.
Irish personality that and they like to talk. Let's get real.
We love to talk.
And talking and then writing a book and that sort of thing. It all comes into the same thing, getting
Yes.
your opinions
Yes.
across and so on. But I just find it interesting to me. And since in the 20th century, we see a lot of some really wonderful authors coming out of
Yes.
Mexico and
Yes.
other places and stuff. But it really took a while.
It isn't cultural, really. No.
Yes.
And I
It's
have
interesting to me.
I have a theory behind that, because I've thought about the very same thing. Why is it that there is not that kind of literary tradition in other countries?
Yes.
And
Not just South America, but other places too. Yes.
Oh, yes. But my theory is that Irish Catholicism, and you have to put that adjective in there, Irish Catholicism is different, because the Irish, there's something in their nature that resists any kind of higher influence. They don't like, I still don't like to be told what to do. We have a problem with authority. Let's face it. So whether it's Pope or King or whatever, we have a very difficult time. And even, for example, before Catholicism reached Ireland, Ireland never had, unless you count Brian Boru, they never had a single king. What they had were all of these different provinces, and each one had their king. And it wasn't until
they fussed with each other a lot too.
they fought with each other.
Yeah.
They were constant. In fact, I'll tell you this story. Before we came to America, we didn't, back in Ireland, we didn't say we were Irishmen. We would say we were Corkmen, or we were from Armagh, or we were from Kerry, or we
that
were
true?
from.
I didn't know that.
And if somebody from, let's say, Dublin, came down to Cork, they were a foreigner.
Oh, wow.
They were a foreigner. And it wasn't until they came to the United States of America and they congregated together that it no longer mattered what county you came from. You were all Irishmen, because we were all against the mill owners, or we were all against the railroad owners, or we were all against the coal mine owners. And so we came together in the United States as Irishmen. It wasn't like that over in Ireland. That's why they were so divided and easily conquered by the British.
As a curiosity, for a person who does genealogy, helping people from a variety of different ethnic groups, The only country where they almost always tell you what town they're from are the Italians. Don't know why.
Oh,
The Irish don't, as a general rule, and I've often had, and it's very hard to find anything in Ireland. My family from Cavan, you know, individual churches, maybe if you had any idea what town they were from, you might find the church and you might find the records, but a lot of stuff got,
right. It
Thrown
was done through the church.
yes.
It
yes,
was,
as
not
it was
through
done in
government.
the United States originally, too.
Yep, yep.
But it lasted longer, and it's hard to find things in the old country.
Very,
in
very
genealogy.
difficult, very difficult. And you're right, they didn't tell you, unless you were from Dublin. Then they would say
They
they were
might.
from Dublin.
But that's rare, I
But
think.
it is rare. And so most of the time, they'll say, I'm from this county.
Yeah, well,
And
my
that's-
great-great-grandfather, it's actually in his, he had an obituary in rural Ohio in 1888. I find it interesting, several inches. And it particularly talked about the fact that he was from County Cavan, and that's the way we know.
Correct.
Because we don't know any other
Correct.
way to find it.
But in order to narrow it down to a particular village or
Yeah.
church, it's very hard to do.
Yeah. A lot of Brady's in Cavan.
But to
now,
get
I'll
back
tell
to
you.
your
Yeah.
original question, because we were so stubborn and refused to take authority, we didn't always listen to the church. We were Irish Catholics, and we did what we did, and we kind of melded it into Catholic teaching. The people who are from Italy or Spain or France, they didn't do that. They were very physically close to the Pope. And so the hold that the church had over continental Europeans was
different.
much tighter.
Yeah.
And so when they transferred over to the United States and settled in South America, Mexico, Central America, they still had that culture of obedience and not questioning the church. Think about it. To read, to educate yourself,
Unusual, yes. It was really unusual.
it is a form of rebellion.
Yeah. No, I think you're absolutely right.
Yeah. So, and we have that tradition in Ireland, whereas other countries don't. And that's the closest I could come for an explanation of that. But there is a difference between Catholics and Irish Catholics. There's always that difference. Even though I would think in the 20th century, Ireland became very, very much under the control of the church. And they're just starting to break out of it
I know.
now.
I know.
Starting to break out of it now. Whether that's good or bad, I don't know. But they are. They are. Good questions. Anything else? Comments?
I think it's a wonderful present. Go ahead.
How did you come across the title?
The
Good
Black
question.
the Black Thorn is a bush that grows inside Ireland, and the Irish used to cultivate it for canes, walking sticks. They used it for clubs, and the shrubbery was called the blackthorn bush. It still grows there, and in fact, ever since I wrote the book, I have a couple of gifts people brought me from Ireland, blackthorn sticks, and I have them. I love them, and I said to myself, what am I going to call my secret society here? Because later on, of course, the name of that secret society got transferred over to the United States in the coal mines. It wasn't, Blackthorn is fictional.
Oh.
That particular, but it's modeled after a real one. You may have heard of the Molly Maguires.
Oh, yeah.
Okay. And they tried to use the owners, when I say they, the owners of the railroads and the mines tried to associate the secret societies with criminal behavior. And so they gave the label to the people who started the unions. Oh, he's a Molly Maguire, and they published it in their newspaper to try to get public opinion against the unions. And so I said, what am I going to call my secret society? I don't want people to dismiss it. So I won't use a real one. I'll make up my own. So I used the shrub, the blackthorn bush, and that's where I got the name. And only I separated it into two words. Whereas if you look it up, it'll be one word, blackthorn bush. This is two words to make a distinction between the plant and the secret society. But they tried to, if you read the book, you will see that the media gets into this too. And I hope people think about the role that media plays in the formation of our ideas today.
Mm.
Why do we believe what we believe? You ever ask yourself that question? Maybe it's because it's constantly broadcast to us. If we start to label people certain things, and it's often enough with images that are associated with it, we start to accept it, even though it might not be accurate, even though it might not be true. I know they did it to the Irish in the 1800s. They took the labels of the secret societies and they carried it right over the ocean with the Irish people, and they put it on them. As soon as they started to rebel, as soon as they started to ask for equal rights, they said, oh, they're members of this society, or they're members of that society. So that's where I got the idea for the Black Thorn, the title.
I have to say, we Irish have done rather well here.
We have done remarkably well, and it's part of our nature that allowed that to happen, I
And they
think.
had the English language, so
That-
that's a big advantage.
That's true. That is very, very true.
One of the things we can give to the English is that they went around conquering people, and because of that, the rest of the world speaks English.
Yes.
It's become the lingua franca that it
Yes,
wasn't
it
when I was
is.
in college.
Yes, it is.
If you wanted to go into certain kinds of fields, you took French or you took German, but English is my husband is a researcher, and he doesn't have to bother with any other languages now. It's all in English.
Sure. And a lot of
It's
people
all-
do speak
yeah.
English, but I will take exception, because I still don't want to give anything to the English. But I will take exception to the way that they did it. You're
Well, I
all
agree.
familiar with the
I agree
penal
with that.
laws, where
Oh, yes.
they would hang you if you got caught speaking Gaelic.
Did your family know Gaelic, Billy Graham?
My family never knew it. The language
My grandmother
disappeared.
spoke
Yeah?
Yeah.
My
And they're
family
trying
never
to
did. Introduce it
yes,
to...
to the country, and I
Yeah.
think that's wonderful.
Yeah, I do too.
I like the sound of it, quite frankly.
I do too. I can, for the life of me, figure out the words themselves, and
I know. I sometimes when I do the Irish collection,
Yeah.
I have troubles.
the diphthongs
Yeah.
in Gaelic.
I don't really get it.
Oh, I don't get it. You know?
But it's a beautiful
They had
language.
classes, I guess, in Lawrence for a while.
Shillelagh.
I-
Is
you
Yeah.
know,
that a weapon?
The Irish is
The shillelagh is
not as much here
uh,
anymore.
is used. It can be exchanged. It can be used for either one. It's a walking stick, but it's also a cudgel in battle. They used it as a weapon to beat people over the head with it. So it's both. It's a club and it's a walking stick, and you can use shillelagh in either one of those uses.
So you say who beat
The Irish used the shillelagh as a weapon.
for how long? When did that start?
Oh, well, it actually took an awful long time to get rid of it, because it became illegal for Irishmen to own guns in Ireland. Only the Protestants could own guns, and if you were caught with a gun, you were executed.
Ah. I have to say that scene where Flynn is killed is about more than I can handle.
Well, I'll tell you the truth. For those of you who haven't read it, I don't want to spoil anything, but the Protestants also had their secret societies to do battle with the Irish
Yes.
societies. And one of the Protestant groups was called the Carters, and they were real. That's not fiction. Now, if anybody grew up on a farm, you'd know what a card is. It's a piece of metal, square, razor sharp, that people used to use to shear sheep before they had electricity. They would take the blade and they would just simply shave the wool off the sheep. That was called a card. Well, there was a group, a secret society made of Protestants who absolutely despised, hated Catholics, and they used cards as a weapon. And it started off as something called huffing, where they would take the card and they would cut your Achilles tendon, and you wouldn't ever be able to walk again. But then they began to use it for torture. They would start to scrape people off with it.
Yeah.
So my neighbor, who read the book, said, he told me, I had to put the book down. I could not read that part of the book.
I'm having more trouble as I get old.
Yep. But
You're dealing with violence.
and a lot of people had that problem. But and I had to wrestle. Do I keep that part in the book or not?
I think you were right. to
And
keep
then I said, I have to keep it in there. I want to show just how cruel the Irish were treated. I want people to see just how cruelly we were treated, so that they become so dissatisfied, so they see how distasteful it is, that maybe they will not treat other people badly. I know they wouldn't go to that extreme, I hope, although there are some out there that would, but I would hope that even the small amount of cruelty that they might give toward another person, maybe an unkind word, whatever, they would think twice before they did it.
Can you anticipate this part, because I'm very squeamish, and so I'm going to just skip over.
Yes, you can.
Yeah.
You can
It
anticipate it.
was tough. It
You
was very
can
tough.
anticipate it. When it describes the carters coming down into this guy's barn, and so you'll be able to,
Okay.
you'll get the idea.
Somebody asked me last night, is Irish, the colors, the green, of course, everybody knows, but
Yes.
the white and the orange.
Yes,
Well, the orange is because of the orange in Northern Ireland, I think.
yes it is.
Sort
That
of trying to be
flag,
inclusive.
that flag, I don't know if you've ever heard of Thomas Marr, the great Civil War general, who rebelled against the English in Ireland. He came from a very rich family. Gave it all up to fight British rule in Ireland. They arrested him and they sent him to Australia. And he escaped. Came to the United States, became a famous Civil War general and governor of the Missouri Territory. It wasn't a state at that particular time, but a great big territory. He was murdered over there. But while he was in Ireland, he had to unite the Irish against the British. So he made a new flag. He took the old Irish flag, which had a green field with a harp, a gold harp
Yeah.
on it. That's the original Irish flag. And he made a new one to try to unite the Protestant and the Catholic.
Okay.
So it had three colors to it. Orange for the Protestant, green for Catholic, and white for peace.
Wow.
He is the one who designed that. And
I did not know that.
yeah.
Wow.
So that's where the colors of Ireland come from. And
My name is Louise Sandberg. I work here at the Lawrence Public Library for many, many years. Thank you for watching, and goodbye.